What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I try and help you guys keep on top of the macro developments happening in the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. For those who are watching for the first time, a big part of my job requires that I follow those macro developments. So if that's something that you guys are interested in as well, and if you want to be just as informed as my clients, maybe consider subscribing. Everyone else, it's good to see you. This is a midweek episode, so it's going to be a little bit shorter than usual. And I have to say, at the beginning right now, this episode is going to be a very foreign policy heavy episode, looking at foreign policy from the US perspective towards China, the PRC perspective towards the US. So there's going to be a lot of that in this episode. We're going to start up with looking at the updates regarding the outbreak, the COVID situation as it's worsened this week in the PRC, and then we're going to end the episode looking at some developments in cross-strait relations in Taiwan. But there's going to be a lot of foreign policy stuff right in the middle. So hopefully you guys enjoy that stuff. As always, if you enjoy the video, it's a massive help if you smash the like button, and also a big thank you to Patreon supporters supporting a small YouTube channel like this. It's very humbling, and I really appreciate the support. So thank you so much. Now, without any further ado, let's jump into this week's midweek episode of China Update. According to the National Health Commission, the PRC mainland on Sunday reported 103 new confirmed COVID cases, of whom 85 were locally transmitted and the rest had arrived from overseas. Monday, the PRC officially reported 55 new non-asymptomatic cases. On Tuesday, 115 new cases were confirmed, and on Wednesday, 138 new cases, 124 of which being local infections. Please note, all these numbers are official numbers. In Hebei province, a province which hugs the capital in northern China, about 22 million people over 3 cities, including the provincial capital of Shijiazhuang, have been placed under lockdown as of Tuesday. It appears, based on the information and what it seems to me at least, that these lockdowns, though strict, are not as intense as the ones that were imposed on Wuhan around this time last year. The local government of Shijiazhuang announced this week that it is going to test all 111 million of its residents for the second time in 7 days. Much of Shunyi district on the outskirts of the capital, Beijing, is also on lockdown, affecting 500,000 people approximately. Counties in northeast China's Heilongjiang province, which has had a spike in recent days, as well as counties in Shanxi province, both in the north, have been closed down and are also on lockdown. The PRC embassy in the United States has also published a notice this week to PRC citizens living there, urging them not to return to China unless it is an emergency. As of Wednesday, 24 provinces have urged their residents not to travel for the Spring Festival in February, given the risk of COVID spread. State-run Xinhua reports that Zheng Yixin, deputy head of the National Health Commission, at a press conference over the weekend, called on people not to return to their hometowns to celebrate Chinese New Year or Spring Festival, but, quote, stay where they live and work during the holiday to reduce personnel flow, end quote. Also, while we're on the virus, before we move on to the next story, it has been reported this week that the full data from the Brazilian tests of China's Sinovac vaccine showed it to be 50.38% effective against COVID-19 in late stage trials, far lower than the 78% efficiency rate announced last week. In Turkey, the vaccine was deemed to be 91.25% effective based on late stage trials, and in Indonesia, the efficiency rate was reported at approximately 65%. By contrast, biotech, Pfizer, have reported efficiency rates at around 95%. The Brazilian testers still claim, however, that the vaccine still appears to give almost 100% protection against the disease, severe enough to require hospitalization. This is a very messy part of the story, and it's still developing. So those of you who are interested in that, keep your eyes on news developments, because like I said, this is a developing story. Okay. Geopolitical stuff, foreign policy stuff. We'll start with the US. On Wednesday, the White House in the US published the recently declassified United States security framework for the Indo-Pacific. For the last 3 years, this document has provided overreaching strategic guidance for implementing the 2017 National Security Strategy within the Indo-Pacific for the United States. This declassification was made 21 years ahead of schedule. There are several potential reasons why the declassification was made so early. For me, the most likely include putting pressure on an incoming Biden administration to stay the course, but also potentially to signal to allies in the Indo-Pacific that they can rely on US support going forward. The American framework seems to have been influenced by Tokyo's 2016 so-called free and open Indo-Pacific policy and 2017 policies that came out of Australia. Let's take a moment to look at some of this document that was declassified this week. So under national security challenges, we can see there the first national security challenge, how to maintain US strategic primacy in the Indo-Pacific region and promote a liberal economic order while preventing China from establishing new illiberal spheres of influence and cultivating areas of cooperation to promote regional peace and prosperity. This is the challenge. Okay, next part, we'll look at the assumptions in the document, and we'll just list off a few here. Strategic competition between the United States and China will persist owing to the divergent nature and goals of our political and economic systems. China will circumvent international rules and norms to gain an advantage. China aims to dissolve US alliances and partnerships in the region. A strong India in cooperation with like-minded countries will act as a counterbalance to China. Chinese economic, diplomatic, and military influence will continue to increase in the near term and challenge the US ability to achieve its national interests in the Indo-Pacific region. And another assumption here in the document, China seeks to dominate cutting-edge technologies, including artificial intelligence and biogenetics, and harness them in the service of authoritarianism. Chinese dominance in these technologies will pose profound challenges to free societies. Now let's look at desired end states. And the main one concerning China in this document was here. The United States and its partners on every continent are resistant to Chinese activities aimed at undermining their sovereignty, including through covert and coercive influence. And we'll touch on some objectives here. Strengthen the capabilities and will of Japan, the Republic of Korea, and Australia to contribute to the end states of the strategy. And it includes there that first point, align our Indo-Pacific strategy with those of Australia, India, and Japan, the Quad. Of course, we've been discussing this and developments within the relationship of the Quad for about 7 or 8 months now on here. Let's continue. Objective, Taiwan. Enable Taiwan to develop an effective asymmetric defense strategy and capabilities that will help ensure its security, freedom from coercion, resilience, and ability to engage in China on its own terms. Prevent China's industrial policies and unfair trading practices from distorting global markets and harming US competitiveness. And one more objective and actions here. Deter China from using military force against the United States and US allies or partners, and develop the capabilities and concepts to defeat Chinese actions across the spectrum of conflict. So what was the People's Republic of China's response to the declassification? Well, this is what Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said to reporters on Wednesday. I have shortened his full remarks for brevity, but this is what he said. Quote, some US politicians want to leave behind a legacy by declassifying the document, but its content only serves to expose the malign intention of the United States to use its Indo-Pacific strategy to suppress and contain China and undermine regional peace and stability. In essence, this is a strategy of hegemony. I can point out at least 3 major mistakes in it. He continues. First, it highlights the Cold War mentality and military confrontation, which goes against the mutual beneficial spirit of regional cooperation, runs counter to regional peoples' aspirations for peace, stability, and development, and threatens regional prospects of peace and development. As such, it should rightly be thrown into the dustbin of history. He goes on to say, quote, second, it is a serious breach of the US government's solemn commitment on Taiwan to China. There is but one China in the world, and the Taiwan region is an inalienable part of Chinese territory. China has the determination, confidence, and capability to foil any foreign interference and Taiwan independence, separatist plots. We will resolutely defend our sovereignty and territorial integrity. All US attempts to contain China with Taiwan are futile. Third, it maliciously distorts China's neighborhood diplomacy and hypes up the so-called China threat. However, lies will always be lies and justice will prevail. China is committed to the path of peaceful development and a defense policy that is defensive in nature. We are a builder of world peace, contributor to global development, and guardian of international order. End quote. Okay, now, since we've looked at US policy vis-a-vis China in the Indo-Pacific, why don't we look at PRC policy vis-a-vis the US in the Indo-Pacific as well. China scholar Walter Kerr of the wonderful email newsletter Chinese Journal Review produced a piece recently that summarized the work of 11 of China's top foreign policy thinkers and scholars. I've reviewed the work myself, and I believe the points that he makes here are fairly representative of their views as well. Now, these are a summary of common views amongst PRC scholars of foreign affairs who would be considered moderates within the PRC, I think, as opposed to the hawks and ethno-nationalists who also vie for influence. I think it's important that we cover some of this because we need to keep this in mind when we want to think about what policymakers, particularly foreign policymakers in Beijing, may be thinking. What is their worldview? What are they reading, etc. Kerr summarizes the PRC moderates' views into several points, which I've shortened for brevity. These are: 1. Due entirely to the United States. This we've covered in detail a lot over the last year, the rhetoric and the narrative that the collapse in relations is 100% the fault of the US. Due entirely to the US, US-China relations have deteriorated significantly over the past 4 years, but relations are unlikely to significantly improve under a Biden administration. 2. Opportunities for renewed US-China engagement on most technology and economic issues look bleak. 3. Calls in Washington to decouple from China will increase, which will accelerate the development of two competing tech models, one led by the United States, the other by China. 4. With Washington's global influence on decline, again, this idea of American decline, which we have also covered a lot over the last 6 to 12 months on this show, the United States will one day lose its hegemonic status, but China cannot easily fill this vacuum in the short term. Its soft power is still too limited, and the United States will long remain a dominant force. China needs more international friends before it can become a great power equal to the United States. 5. To increase its global influence, China should become more active in international organizations like the World Trade Organization. It should lead efforts to reform existing global governance structures. 6. Beijing should double down on efforts to create new international coordination mechanisms that put China at the center, including via initiatives like Belt and Road. 7. China should also put more energy into strengthening relationships with its neighbors and major powers, including with historic rivals like Japan. Now keep in mind, this is considered the moderate position currently coming from PRC academics and scholars. It doesn't necessarily represent policy directions coming from the top leadership. In a separate article published recently, Kerr actually doubts that these policy recommendations are particularly attractive to the top. Quote, Xi Jinping is unlikely to heed that advice, however, especially as he tries to fashion himself as a stronger version of Deng Xiaoping. But if Joe Biden takes a more multilateral foreign policy approach than his predecessor did, Xi may determine that he had no better choice. End quote. And of course, anyone who has been following foreign policy developments coming out of the PRC over the last 12 months can certainly see that moderates certainly have not been driving foreign policy decisions. You guys also may remember a few weeks ago we discussed the increasingly hostile environment moderates in the PRC are facing in foreign policy debates from both state and society. And last up, let's talk about a few Taiwan developments we should be keeping an eye on cross-strait relations through all this. The US said that it would relax its restrictions on meetings between American officials and their counterparts in Taiwan earlier in the week. Quote, Taiwan is a vibrant democracy and reliable partner of the United States, and yet for several decades the State Department has created complex internal restrictions to regulate our diplomats, service members, and other officials' interactions with their Taiwanese counterparts. The United States government took these actions unilaterally in an attempt to appease the communist regime in Beijing. No more. Today, I'm announcing that I am lifting all of these self-imposed restrictions. Executive branch agencies should consider all contact guidelines regarding relations with Taiwan previously issued by the Department of State under authorities delegated by the Secretary of State to be null and void. End quote. Now, the Biden administration could easily reverse the move if they wanted. However, if they had been planning for a closer relationship with Taipei themselves, this status quo change happening now during the closing days of the Trump administration could end up being useful for an incoming Biden administration. We noticed last year that the Biden team's position on Taiwan has changed slightly from previous Democratic administrations, where a Biden White House supports, quote, peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues consistent with the wishes and best interests of the people of Taiwan. Now, the previous wording of this in previous democratic policy statements was peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues consistent with the wishes of people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. So there's both sides of the Taiwan Strait has been removed and changed to best interests of the people of Taiwan. Beijing's reaction was as expected. Quote, "We advise Mr. Pompeo and his like to recognize the historical trend. Stop manipulating Taiwan-related issues, stop retrogressive acts, and stop going further down the wrong path and dangerous path. Otherwise, they will be harshly punished by history." End quote. Kelly Craft, the US ambassador to the United Nations, was set to arrive in Taiwan on Wednesday for a 3-day visit and was scheduled to meet with Tsai Ing-wen on Thursday morning. However, the visit, along with other State Department meetings around the world, was cancelled due to complications related to the White House transition over the next week or so. Also on Taiwan this week, Taiwan released a new passport design. In the redesigned travel document, Republic of China appears in a smaller font, while the words Taiwan passport appear in large, bold type. Okay guys, that's this week's episode, midweek episode at least, of China Update. I hope you enjoyed it. Wherever you are, I hope you're keeping safe and keeping sane. I will see you guys next time on China Update.